This all started on a weekend that was supposed to be fun. My sister and I decided to go camping at a spot our friends told us about. It was deeper in the woods than we'd ever been before, but they said it was worth it for the views and the solitude. We were all about trying something new, so we packed our gear and set off. The first day was everything we hoped for. The place was beautiful, surrounded by tall trees and a clear blue sky overhead. We set up our tent by a small lake, which was so clear you could see right to the bottom. After a day of hiking and exploring, we cooked some food over the fire and settled in. That's when things took a turn. As the fire died down, we started hearing noises. Not the usual sounds of the woods at night, but whispers. We thought we were imagining things, so we laughed it off. But the whispers got louder, like someone was talking just beyond the trees. I grabbed a flashlight, and we went to check it out. We didn't find anyone. The forest was quiet again, so we figured it was just our imaginations running wild and headed back to the tent. But we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Trying to ignore it, we zipped up the tent and tried to get some sleep. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when a sudden noise woke me up. It sounded like someone was walking around our tent. I nudged my sister, and she heard it too. We lay there, holding our breaths, listening to the footsteps circling us. Then, out of nowhere, a laugh cut through the night, close enough to make us jump. It wasn't a friendly sound. We didn't dare to move. The footsteps and laughter continued on and off for what felt like hours. When daylight finally broke, we were too scared to leave the tent until the sun was fully up. Outside, we found footprints all around our campsite, but no sign of who they belonged to. We decided to pack up and leave as soon as we could. But when we went to put the fire, we found something that made our blood run cold. There were some strange symbols scattered around, none of which we recognized, but they looked intentional, like a message. We didn't stick around to figure out what it meant. We packed up as fast as we could and hiked back to our car. The whole way, we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed, but every time we looked back, there was nothing there. The drive back from the camping spot was mostly silent. We kept replaying the events of the night, trying to make sense of what happened. The laughter, the footsteps, the symbols in the dirt. It all felt like a bad dream. But the dirt on our boots and the photos we had taken were evidence enough it was all real. Once home, we tried to put the experience behind us. But a couple of days later, something happened that dragged us right back. I found a piece of paper stuck to my car windshield. It was a drawing. Crude but unmistakable, it was the same symbols we had seen around the fire pit. Underneath, in rough handwriting, was a message. "Come back." We were freaked out. How did they find my car? Who were they? And what did they want with us? We debated going to the police but worried they wouldn't take us seriously. So we did the next best thing. We went back to our friends who had recommended the spot, looking for answers. Our friends were as baffled as we were. They said they had camped there multiple times without incident. Seeing our distress, they offered to come with us to the spot, to see if we could figure things out together. Armed with more people and a sense of determination, we returned to the camping site. It looked untouched since we had left. No new symbols, no footprints, nothing. We spent the day there, trying to uncover anything that could explain what happened. As evening approached, one of our friends stumbled upon a hidden trail leading off from our campsite. Curiosity got the best of us, and we followed it, moving cautiously. The trail led to a small clearing, and what we found there was both a relief and a new wave of questions. It was a camp, but not like any we'd seen before. There were symbols similar to those we had found, scattered around on various items, and there, sitting around a small fire, was a group of people. They looked up, surprised to see us. After a tense moment, they explained. They were part of a local historical society, reenacting the lives and practices of indigenous peoples who once lived in the area. The symbols were part of their rituals, and the laughter and footsteps were meant to scare off animals, or so they claimed. As for the note on my car, one of them admitted to following us back, wanting to invite us to learn more, but realized too late how creepy it had come off. We were unsure if they were telling the truth or if they were intentionally trying to scare us, because we two girls were alone at that time. We left the clearing with mixed feelings. Part of us was relieved to have an explanation, but another part questioned the validity of their story. Was it all just a misunderstanding, or was there something more they weren't telling us? I've never been much of a camper, but when my cousin George suggested we try it for a weekend getaway, I figured, why not? He said he knew of a spot where we could really get away from it all, deep in the woods by a river that was great for fishing. It sounded peaceful, a chance to disconnect and enjoy nature. I didn't realize just how disconnected we'd be. We arrived late Friday afternoon. The spot was more secluded than I imagined. Miles away from the nearest road, surrounded by dense forest. It was beautiful, in a wild, untamed way. We set up our tent and gathered wood for a fire as the sun began to set. That first night, we sat around the fire, talking and laughing. The isolation felt refreshing at first, until the sounds of the forest grew louder around us. It was then that we heard the first scream. It sounded human, full of pain and fear, cutting through the night air from somewhere across the river. We froze, looking at each other in disbelief. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. George wanted to check it out, thinking someone might be in trouble, but I convinced him it was too risky in the dark. We agreed to cross the river at first light to investigate. That night, I barely slept, jumping at every sound outside the tent. The next morning, we crossed the river, finding the other side much denser with underbrush. It was tough going, and after an hour of searching, we found nothing. No signs of anyone, no campsite, nothing. We were about to head back when we stumbled upon an old, decaying cabin hidden among the trees. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, the wood rotting, windows broken. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to take a look inside. The air was stale, filled with the scent of mold and something else, something metallic. In the main room, we found a table covered in old, rusted tools that looked like they belonged to a hunter or trapper. But it was the room in the back that made my blood run cold. Chains were bolted to the walls, and in the corner, there were stains. Dark stains that looked too much like dried blood. It was clear that something terrible had happened there. We left the cabin, the sense of being watched creeping over us. As we hurried back to our campsite, the feeling intensified. We were no longer sure we were alone in these woods. When we finally saw our tent through the trees, relief washed over us until we saw the footprints. They circled the tent, large and uneven, leading back towards the river and the cabin. That's when we heard it again, the scream, closer this time, filled with such terror that it rooted us to the spot. We realized then that we weren't just bystanders in these woods, we were part of something much more horrifying. After hearing that scream again, George and I felt a chill run down our backs. We knew we had to find out what it was, even though every part of us wanted to run the other way. So we took our flashlights, mine shaking a bit in my hand, and we slowly started towards where the scream came from, trying to be quiet and listen for any sounds. The woods seemed darker now, and every little noise made us stop and look around. We were really scared but tried to act brave for each other. As we got closer to the place, our hearts were beating super fast. Then we saw her, a girl, sitting on the ground near the cabin, looking really scared and hurt. Her clothes were torn and she had a bad cut on her leg. She looked up at us with eyes full of fear and whispered, "Please help me." We rushed over to her. She told us in a shaky voice that she got separated from her friends and someone was chasing her. She didn't know who it was because it was too dark, but she was really scared. We knew we had to get her out of there. We helped her stand up, and I wrapped my jacket around her to keep her warm. We started heading back to our camp, but every shadow seemed to move, and we felt like someone was watching us. The girl kept looking back, whispering, "He's out there." When we got to our tent, we didn't waste time. We grabbed our stuff, and just as we were about to leave, we heard footsteps coming fast toward us from the woods. We turned our flashlights toward the sound, and for a second, we saw a figure standing there, watching us. Then it disappeared back into the dark. We didn't wait around to see who it was. We helped the girl as fast as we could back to the car and drove off. All the way back, we kept looking in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that figure following us. We got the girl to a hospital and told the police everything. They searched the woods but didn't find anyone. The girl's friends were found safe, but they hadn't seen anyone chasing them. Driving home, we kept thinking about the figure in the woods and what could have happened if we'd been a bit slower. It was the scariest night of our lives. So, this all went down last summer. Me and my buddy, Jason, found this cool spot for camping on the internet. It was kind of hidden, way out in the woods a couple hours from where we live. The best part was it was supposed to be super quiet, and there was this natural spring nearby we could check out. We packed up the car and hit the road, chatting about all sorts of stuff and getting pumped for some time away from everything. When we got there, it was even more out of the way than we thought. No one else around, just us. We found a nice spot to set up the tent and get settled in. The first part of the night was awesome. Just us, the fire, and the sounds of the woods. But then, things got weird. We heard something moving around outside. At first, we figured it was an animal or something. But it kept going, like it was circling our camp. Jason grabbed a flashlight and looked around, but we didn't see anything. We tried to laugh it off, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. We decided to head into the tent, thinking we'd feel safer there. But just as we were about to crash, something hit the tent. We yelled out, asking who was there, but got no answer. Everything went quiet again, but we barely slept, jumping at every little sound. Next morning, we found footprints all around our tent. Big ones, like from a person, not an animal. We talked about packing up and leaving, but ended up convincing each other to stick it out one more night. We figured it was just some weirdo trying to scare us or something. We spent the next day hiking to that spring, which was pretty cool, and tried to forget about the night before. But when we got back, our tent had been moved, and our stuff looked like someone had gone through it. The weirdest part was our fire pit. It had fresh ashes in it, like someone had made a fire after we left in the morning. That's when we knew for sure. We weren't alone out here. And whoever it was, they were messing with us on purpose. Deciding to stay after finding our stuff messed with was tough, but Jason and I weren't about to let someone ruin our trip. We figured we'd stay up late, keep the fire big and bright, and maybe catch whoever was creeping around our camp. As night fell, every little sound seemed louder. We tried to keep it cool, talking and laughing, but our eyes kept darting around, searching the darkness beyond the firelight. Hours ticked by and nothing. No weird noises, no footprints, nothing. We almost started to think we'd scared them off, or maybe even made up how serious it seemed the night before. But then, just as we were about to call it a night, we heard it. As clear as anything, footsteps. Not an animal's, but like someone trying not to be heard, moving slowly and carefully. This time, we didn't shout or make a scene. We just listened, trying to figure out where they were coming from. The steps got closer, then stopped. The silence was killer. You could feel it, like someone was standing just out of sight, watching. That's when Jason whispered, "Let's do something." I nodded, and we decided we'd sneak around and try to come up behind whoever it was. We left the fire as it was, hoping they'd think we were still there, and tiptoed into the woods. It was pitch black, and every step felt like a mile. We didn't get far before we heard a noise behind us, back at our camp. We froze, then crept back, circling wide to see. There by our fire was a guy, just standing there, looking at our tent. He didn't see us, he was focused on the tent. We couldn't see his face well, but he was big, dressed in dark clothes. and he didn't seem to have any gear with him. No backpack, nothing. It was like he'd just wandered out of the woods. We watched for a minute, hearts pounding. Then, Jason stepped on a twig, and it snapped loudly. The guy whipped around, and for a second, we all just stared at each other. Then, he bolted. Just took off running into the woods. Without thinking, we chased him. Not sure why, maybe to confront him, maybe just to see who he was. But he was fast, disappearing into the dark. We lost his trail and ended up standing in the middle of the woods, lost and freaked out. It took us forever to find our way back to the camp. The fire was dying, and the whole place felt different, like we'd seen something we weren't supposed to. We didn't sleep a wink, just waited for the sun to come up, packed our stuff, and got out of there as fast as we could. We reported what happened to the local police, but they didn't find anyone. Said it might have been a local messing with campers or someone passing through. We never did find out who it was or what they wanted. But one thing's for sure, we haven't gone camping like that since. Every time we talk about it, we wonder who was out there with us and what would happen if we'd caught up to him.